All right, welcome back, folks. Welcome back to the second day of class, the last day of the first week. So we're making some progress here. So after today, we're 1 week down, 16 to go. Uh, I hope everybody's doing well. I hope the first week is treating you okay. I understand that there's a lot of responsibilities and tasks and things being mounted on you. And that's just the nature of what you signed up for. The best approach is just to stay in the moment. What do you have to do today? What do you have to do in the next weekend? You have an idea of what's coming, so just lay out like a schedule for yourself. Okay, like I should be doing this, this, and that during this time because I've got these exams that are all going to hit around the same time, and if I get things done early, then I have time to do these other things. If you do that for yourself, then things become manageable. You don't get backed into a corner. You don't wind up in a situation where you're trying to do 30 things at once and it all winds up being crap because you just don't have enough time to do everything. So the beginning of semester is like the opportunity to really make this work out for you by just like really just understanding that you have a certain amount of time and it needs to be managed in the best way possible. So free time is an opportunity. It's not an opportunity for you to just like take your mind off things because you're in this and you can't deny it. Like you can't run away from it. You can't hide from it. Like in the end, you have to face it because you signed up for these courses. You paid for them. You're going to take exams. You're going to get a grade. You got to make the best of it. If you don't, it's going to go badly. And then, some of you are going to wind up throwing away this thing that you bought. I mean, when was the last time you bought something and just immediately threw it away? Like, why would you buy something and then just like toss it on the ground and go to the bathroom on it? Like, why would you do that? You shouldn't do that. That's what you're basically doing when you sign up for classes and then you just like, forget it, whatever. Don't give up at any point. Things will mount up. Things will seem challenging. Sometimes it will get to you. And those are the times where people start to kind of shut off. And then they start to kind of separate and disconnect from the process that we go through here. Those are the times where you really have to step it up and you really have to be mindful of the fact that like you're capable of so much. And like, yeah, in the moment, maybe you're feeling weak and things are feeling like too much, but like those moments pass. And then who you are and what you're capable of doesn't change. Like you still have that and you can work through things and you can accomplish things even under the worst circumstances. In fact, under the worst circumstances is where you truly figure out exactly what you're capable of. So if you're not pushing yourself during those times, then you're not really like going on that like wonderful adventure that we all go on in life of like discovery, self-discovery, of like really understanding like what we're truly capable of and then actually becoming that. And then accomplishing great things. So don't run away from yourselves. Don't run away from the moment. Stay in the moment. When I had to do my PhD dissertation, which is essentially writing a book on top of like doing statistics and math and all sorts of complicated things, like it was a huge task. Like I was one of 14 people that entered the program. I was one of 4 people that graduated on time. That when I graduated at the end of the 5th year, most people did not graduate. Some of them are still there. What I was doing every day was just like, what do I have to do today? Because if I thought about how much I had to do, it was too much, like it just like, it blew my mind. I couldn't handle it. And so I was like, okay, what am I doing today? What am I doing tomorrow? What am I doing the day after that? And then eventually, I got a little bit done here, I got a little bit done there, and eventually I got it all done. And I get to just like live your life now and get paid for it, which is nice. And you'll, whatever road you're on, it'll lead to whatever you want it to lead to eventually. You really have to like just be in the moment and just like the most important thing is like what's going on inside of here. Like if you can really just like figure out how to be at peace inside of yourself and just like take everything in like a clear-minded, like focused way, and not let like the chaos of life get to you, then success is imminent for you. All right, are there any questions about anything before I get started on the material? We're going to cover chapter 1 today. Any questions? Yeah.
I know there's some appendices in some of the chapters.
If we are, I'll mention it. You're free to cover stuff that I don't cover in class that's in the book. That's one thing I was going to mention today. So like there's a bunch of problems in the back of the book. I don't cover all the problems, and I don't want you to look at all the problems because um, the problems like tend to muddy the waters of understanding of just like the very clear ideas and principles that I know you need to learn and take away from this course. A lot of the problems are just meant to kind of like challenge you in ways that are not necessarily clear cut, more of like clever ways of like trying to like come to the same conclusion, and that's ultimately not what economics is about. Economics is about like being able to clearly establish relationships that explain how whatever it is you're studying works, in order to then try to predict how that behavior might work in the future. It's not about just doing a million problems and just realizing how clever you can be by doing them. So that's kind of what those problems are meant to do. I cover some of the problems in my class, in my lectures, and those are the ones you should be focusing on. Again, like I mentioned, my lectures are the main source of material for the course, and the book is supplementary to it. You are free to look through the book, but don't ask me for the solutions at the end of the problem. At the end of the book, at the end of the chapters, I won't give them to you because it will throw you off. And believe me, for those of you looking for a lot of challenge, like you're going to get it over time. These things will build up. By the 6th week, by the time you have the first exam, like there will be enough things where you will feel like, okay, this is enough information I need to learn. This is enough of a challenge for me. And if you're going further in economics, you will be further challenged in the future. So just focus on getting the basics down. Believe me, the basics are going to be complicated enough by the end of the semester that you'll feel satisfied by what you've been exposed to and what you've learned in this class. All right, any other questions? So as I mentioned earlier, I do bring these germ masks to class. You don't have to wear one. You don't have to do anything, but they'll always be there. It's up to you if you want to put one on. If somebody's experiencing cold and flu symptoms around you and they're not wearing one and you want to wear one so you don't contract something, feel free to put one on. Nobody's going to think weirdly of you. We all get sick, and everybody is very happy when you're not getting them sick, right? So just saying. Anyway, I won't talk about it again, but it will always be there. All right, so chapter 1 is your standard like introductory chapter to most econ classes, where we go over just like the basic principles that underlie the logic of the approach that we take in economics. So a lot of the stuff we'll cover is stuff that you've heard before. It might be covered in a little bit more sophisticated way, but likely not in the first chapter. But again, it won't be too much of a challenge yet. Also, we'll finish chapter 1, so I will open up the first homework and the first mini paper, but nothing will be due until after the end of the 3rd week because, people are adding and dropping, etc. So due dates will start popping up, but again, they will be at the end of the 3rd week. But once we're past that 3rd week, it'll be normal. Like we finish a chapter, you have a week to finish a mini paper, you have a week to do the homework. So just keep that in mind. And if you're not registered for the class yet, and you were here on Monday, again, make sure you sign in at the end of the day. And if you're here and we're not here on Monday and are trying to get into the course, you're going to be the least priority for me. As far as this class goes, depending on how many people showed up today, I have 8 people that were here on Monday. So if those 8 people are here today, those 8 people will get priority for permission numbers based on their order in the wait list, and then people that weren't on the wait list will get the next priority, and then whoever didn't show up on Tuesday and is trying to get in through this system will get the last priority. I'll address all that at the end of class for those of you that are here trying to get in. So make sure you come up here and sign this and talk about it at the end. Everybody else, sorry you have to hear that, but housekeeping, it's going to happen for 3 weeks, and then it'll be over, and it'll be good. I hate this part of the semester because I feel terrible because people want to get in and they're like, their sad faces come to me, and it's just, I want to get in, I'm trying. And it's like, I want to let you in, but I can't. Like fire codes won't allow me to let more people in than there are seats for. And even though not everybody winds up showing up all the time for lectures, in exams, everybody shows up, and that's when we don't have seats. Anyway, we're done with that. All right, let's jump into chapter 1, Thinking Like an Economist. So Microeconomics, which is the basis of price theory, the basis of this intermediate course in economic, um, uh, basically microeconomics, is the study of decision making, the decision making of individuals. Those individuals can be just people, and those people can represent an individual or a household. It's also the decision making of firms, right? The producers in the economy. So, um, in order for us to be able to model these decisions, ultimately we focus on the costs and benefits to doing an activity. So there's two types of activities that we look at. We look at either or activities, or how much activities. So you're either going to go to class or not, or you've already gone to class 8 times, and then the question is, should you go to class that 9th time or not? So if it's an either or decision, we look at overall costs and benefits. If it's a how much decision, we look at the marginal cost and the marginal benefit, how much extra cost or extra benefit you gain or have to incur by, going, taking on that extra unit of whatever activity it is you're doing. So that's sort of the focus, the general focus of what we're going to be talking about in this section, and it will be the underlying logic of a lot of what we do in this class. All right, so many of the choices economists study can be posed as the following question: should I do activity X? So economists answer such questions by comparing the cost and benefit of doing the activity in question. So if we let C of X denote the cost of doing activity X, and B of X denote the benefit of doing activity X, then the decision rule to either do an activity or not is if the benefit, B of X, outweighs the cost, C of X, then do activity X. Otherwise, do not. Very simple decision rule. So again, like, this class is about simplifying behavior to a way that will allow us to study a particular aspect of the economy that ultimately leads to setting prices in the simplest way possible. We live in a very complicated world, right? There's just a lot of variables acting upon everything all the time. We need to focus on making that system as simple as possible and explaining as much as possible in that simplicity. And so ultimately we want to, because the simplicity, the purpose of the simplicity is so that then we can use these models, again, to predict behavior. Ultimately, that's what we're looking for. So if we're looking at setting prices, we want to know, okay, so what are the forces setting a price? And then how might that price change over time? And therefore, if we're looking at the price of an asset or whatever, how might that behave in the future? So to be most effective in that analytical approach, you need to use a computer. And a computer needs very simple language because everything is clear cut in a computer. Everything has to be very clearly defined. And so our models are defined in a way that basically allows a computer to understand it and then ultimately be able to be used to calculate things that would take forever for an individual person to do. And so that's why you're going to wind up seeing a lot of this things like this simple notation and these simple expressions that ultimately are meant to be programmed into a computer to be able to then use these models to predict things. So if you're going to be in finance and you maybe go to a finance firm and they're using some sort of software that is trying to calculate how prices might work in the future or whatever, this kind of stuff is happening in the background. You won't ever see it, but the logic will be in the coding of the program you use. So it's just good to have that understanding of what's happening behind the scenes, right? You don't just want to see the Wizard of Oz face and think, oh, it's God. No, you want to know there's some guy behind the curtain, pressing a bunch of levers and what those levers are and what they do, and you want to know what's actually happening versus come up with silly ideas about what's actually happening. All right, so to apply this rule, we must define and measure costs and benefits. So that's where a lot of this class, the approach in this class will be in what are the costs and the benefits, right, to producing, to consuming. So monetary values, right? Values measured in dollars are a useful common denominator for this purpose, even when the activity has nothing directly to do with money. So oftentimes, if we're talking about like how satisfied somebody is with something, we'll put a dollar sign on that level of satisfaction in order to then compare it against maybe like a dollar denominated cost, right? So in order just to be clear cut, so like ultimately, if we are again programming this into a computer, it can make sense versus like a person has feelings and then the computer's like what are feelings, like it's like it just wouldn't work. So a lot of what we do is sometimes counterintuitive to just like our normal behavior patterns in terms of what we think and what works for us, just on a personal level, because again, and I'll talk about this more throughout this lecture, the models we use are a simplified version of reality. They're not always going to be the most realistic versions of reality, but in the way that they're used, they are the best we have to be able to predict, certain patterns that we're interested in predicting. All right, so this B of X, the benefit. So let's say we're talking about production. So a firm is producing, they have certain costs that they incur to produce, and the benefits of producing are the revenues that they gain from selling, right? Revenue is price times quantity. So you can think of B of X as like the benefit, the revenue that a firm makes. So that's one example of what the benefit could be versus the cost. So we define B of X as the maximum dollar amount you would be willing to pay to do X. So that's another way to think of B of X. It's sort of like, how much do you value an activity, right? So like if you're going to eat an extra pizza, or you're going to eat a pizza, like how much do you value that pizza versus like what you have to pay for it? So often B of X will be a hypothetical magnitude, the amount you would be willing to pay if you had to, even though no money will change hands. And that's sort of how we justify the use of like these values to sort of represent like a level of satisfaction, even though we do have a measure for that, which we'll talk about later, which is called utility, which is a ranking system. We'll talk about that in a few chapters. C of X, in turn, is the value of all the resources you must give up in order to do activity X. C of X need not involve an explicit transfer of money either. So costs don't necessarily need to be just in terms of dollars. There are other ways to look at costs. So we have this term, it's called the reservation price of an activity. So the reservation price of an activity X is the price at which a person would be indifferent between doing activity X and not doing activity X. So it's the most essentially somebody values something. So so let's say I value a pizza at $5 worth of satisfaction. If the pizza costs anywhere below that, I'm willing to buy the pizza. If the pizza costs $5.01, I'm not willing to buy a pizza because I don't value it at $5.01. And so $5 is that cutoff between me eating the pizza and me not eating the pizza. So it's the point at which I am indifferent between doing it or not doing it. It's basically just the cutoff. Yeah. Yes, you can. We'll talk about opportunity cost in a second. Hold on. But I appreciate that you know that term and want to bring it up. Thank you. But we'll get there in a second. All right, so just a quick example, that'll highlight the nature of this reservation price. So let's say, and this is from one of the homework problems. Let's say you can drive to campus, or you can take a bus, or you can walk to campus. Driving costs you $1 per mile in gas and maintenance, and the bus costs you $1 for unlimited distance. And walking is free, but involves a disutility value, so you lose satisfaction overall. And you can quantify that in terms of $1 per mile. So each mile you walk hurts you by $1 in terms of how you feel about walking. So if you live 2 miles from campus and are a rational decision maker, so in economics, when we talk about rational, we're talking about an agent, somebody that's making decisions that is always choosing the decision that's going to make them best off. They're always choosing the one that's going to put them in a better position versus not. So that's what we mean when we say rational. So if you live 2 miles from campus and are a rational decision maker, what is your reservation price for a bus ticket? So you're a rational decision maker. You want to get to school and you want to incur the lowest cost possible, right? Driving will cost you 2 miles. The bus will cost you $1, and walking is free, but it does cost you $2 as well in this utility, right? So obviously you're going to want to take the bus, right? But what is your reservation price for the bus? What is your cutoff for taking the bus? It's not $1 because the next best option is how much? $2, right? So you would still be willing to take the bus if it costs $1.50? Right, you would because it's still cheaper than the $2, right? So what is your reservation price for the bus? What was that? Well, it's $2. It's $2. It's your cutoff, right? It's the point at which you would no longer be willing to take the bus. It's the point at which you would be indifferent between taking the bus or walking or driving the car. So that is your reservation price. So the next best option, as I mentioned, are to drive or walk. Each costs $2 at a price of $2 for the bus ticket. You'd be indifferent between the bus and the other modes of transportation. $2 is thus your reservation price for the bus ticket. As long as taking the bus costs less than this price, you will take the bus. Yeah.
What do you factor in convenience?
So whenever we're dealing with a problem like this, like you have to work within the problem. Like don't bring other stuff into it because then it will get more complicated. And yeah, we can talk about what could happen, but it'll just complicate what we're just trying to highlight, which in this case is just what a reservation price is. Exactly. Do not overthink these things. They are simplified realities. We need to work within them in order to just like understand them, and that's all you really need for this course. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Like at that point, like if it's more than $2, then you're paying more than you would pay more than the other alternatives, and also you might prefer those other alternatives in terms of utility, which is satisfaction, to just riding the bus, right? So yeah. So the reservation price is just the most a person is willing to pay for something ultimately. All right, so again, if the cost of taking the bus is greater than $2, you will take a different method of commuting. All right, so things like this. So I'm going to go through a practice problem soon. So just remember, like the practice problems are going to be like the basis of what the exams will be based on, and the homework problems will also play a role in terms of like the true and false stuff that's in the exams. Everything else is just meant to give you like contextual information to help you understand the concepts, the logic that underlies the problems. So really, you should be focusing on the language that's being established here that you ideally learned some of in microeconomics and is being covered again here. So like highlighted terms, and then also of course the practice problems are going to be key. All right, so economists have been criticized for making unrealistic assumptions about how people calculate costs and benefits when making decisions. So again, we're talking about simplifying the reality as much as possible to be able to rein in some of the chaos so we can make some predictions. It's not perfect. And so the assumptions we make to simplify reality are sometimes criticized. There's two responses to this criticism. The first is that economists don't assume that people actually make such calculations explicitly. We don't assume that people just sit and like always weigh the costs and benefits to something. Like they don't like ascribe like some dollar value to their feelings versus like the cost that they're actually like. We don't assume that. That's not necessarily what people explicitly are always doing, but indirectly we are kind of doing that, right? So it kind of works. But if we include it in the model and then we aggregate the decision maker into like a population of the same kind of decision maker, then it leads us to a conclusion about the economy, some equilibrium condition that kind of does mirror the way the overall economy or the part of the economy we're studying works. And so the predictive power of the method ultimately makes the whole approach legitimate, not necessarily like the simplifying assumptions. The simplifying assumptions are things that are always being talked about. Like how can we rethink this? It's a changing process, but the end result of the models, there's a consensus about the fact that they do work enough or are the best they can be given what we know now. So again, instead, economists argue that we can make useful predictions by assuming people act as if they made such calculations. A second response to the charge that economists make unrealistic assumptions is to concede that behavior does often differ from the predictions of economic models. So although we make predictions, we we acknowledge that our predictions are imperfect, and we cannot, exactly predict how an industry is going to work, a market's going to work, an entire economy is going to work. Why? Because of what John Maynard Keynes, a famous economist who developed macroeconomics in the 1930s, termed animal spirits. What are animal spirits? Well, it's the animal side of us. Like, we're all logical beings. We make the right decisions for ourselves, but we also have feelings inside of us that drive us crazy sometimes and make us do things that don't make sense. Donald Trump. So the animal spirits are sometimes going to get in the way of what we all maybe even collectively think is the best thing for the economy to do, or for society to benefit from the economy. And so the best economists are the ones that acknowledge that our models are imperfect and that our predictions are not necessarily always going to lead to some concrete, future that is tangible. But sometimes you will encounter economists that do sort of that are delusional, and they actually believe that everything we do is absolute truth, and they will impose on you the idea that the predictions that we have are truth. And those are the economists you need to be wary of. You need to be cautious of those people, because they're more ideologically driven than anything else, and they will mask it as just being like authority on truth. And so that's why it's important for you, even if you don't wind up using anything you learn in classes like this, to understand things like this, so that then you can see through some of the things that are being said to you by those that might assert themselves as authorities in a particular discipline that can be very influential over your life. All right, so even where economic models fail on descriptive grounds, they often provide useful guidance for decisions. Even if they don't always predict how we do behave, they may often give useful insights into how to achieve our goals more efficiently. All right, so there's some common pitfalls in decision making that we need to talk about. One is that often in decision making, only explicit costs are taken into consideration and not implicit costs. So one pitfall is to overlook costs that are not explicit. So if doing some activity X means not being able to do activity Y, then the value to you of doing Y, had you done it, is what's called an opportunity cost of doing activity X. So the opportunity cost of an activity is the value of all that must be sacrificed to do X. Opportunity costs include both explicit and implicit costs. So, brief example, you're in college, you have explicit costs that you incur by being in college. You pay for your books, you pay for your tuition, you pay for your housing. Explicit costs, you pay money for those things. What are your implicit costs though? Well, while you're here, you're not working, so therefore you're not making money at your job. So you are foregoing the wages that you could be earning in order to be here and learn and increase your knowledge, your what we call human capital, so that you can make more money in the future, right? But that is a cost of you being here. That is an implicit cost. And so your opportunity cost of coming to college is your explicit cost, what you're paying out, plus your implicit cost, what you're giving up. So the art in applying the concept correctly lies in being able to recognize the most valuable alternative that is sacrificed by the pursuit of a given activity. So again, it's an art. It's not necessarily clear-cut. You have to sort of figure out what are the implicit costs in any given situation. Another pitfall in decision-making is to ignore sunk costs. Essentially, what this ultimately comes down to is that there's no sense crying over spilled milk. The milk is spilled, nothing you can do about it, move on, get some more milk. Oftentimes, though, folks, when they incur costs that cannot be recuperated, they still try to incorporate them into their decision making. These costs are called sunk costs, and they should be ignored, and that is one of the important principles that underlie effective decision making that, again, is the approach that we take as economists in our modeling of decision making. So sometimes an expenditure may seem relevant when in reality it is not. Again, these are sunk costs, costs that are beyond recovery at the moment a decision is made. Unlike opportunity costs, these costs should be ignored. Not ignoring them is a second pitfall of decision making. All right, so let's do one practice problem to just drive home the nature of opportunity and sunk costs. All right, so John is a freelance web designer. He earns $210 per day on average, with plenty of unfilled orders for his services. He's gone skiing for the weekend, but he's forgotten his skis. He's considering three options. One is to stay indoors at the ski resort and work remotely. The other is to ski for 2 days and to work 1 day. And then the third is to ski for 3 days and just to forget work. The costs of skiing are as follows. So these are the explicit costs of skiing. Transportation to the resort is $120. Lodging at the resort is $200. Ski pass is $23 per day. Ski rental is $25 per day. An important thing to know, though, is that John has also found out that the resort has a special 3-day pass, including ski rental, for $75. He figures it's worth about $30 a day for him to ski. So there's like a package deal, and also he has some utility he gains from skiing that can be quantified as $30 a day. The most important thing, though, is to know that, and we're going to assume here, that John has already reached the ski slopes and that he cannot cancel his room reservation. He now has to decide what to do. Before we move any further, what are the sunk costs here? The transportation, right? And the lodging, right? Exactly. The transportation and the lodging. He's already at the resort. He's already gotten his room. Like, he's paid for these things. He can't recoup them. They are sunk costs. They should be ignored. All right. So again, here are all the costs, and those are his earnings: $210 per day, $30 a day for him to ski, in terms of utility value. So the question is, what is the relevant cost of option one? That is to stay indoors at the resort and work remotely. So obviously, we're going to ignore the sunk costs, right? Ignore sunk costs. So we're ignoring these two costs, as we've already established. So for him to stay indoors and ski remotely, what is his cost? Does he have an explicit cost? No, right? What is the implicit cost of him staying indoors and not skiing? Right, and how do we value that? $30 a day, right? So that is his implicit cost of staying indoors for the entire weekend and working. So that is going to be part of our opportunity cost. The value of all of them must be sacrificed to do the activity. The relevant costs are the opportunity cost, implicit plus explicit cost. So the opportunity cost is equal to the $30 a day for him to ski, the utility value he would gain from skiing, which he's giving up, times 3 days, so that's $90, plus 0 explicit cost because he's not skiing. All right, so that's the relevant cost of option 1. What is the relevant cost of option 2? Ski for 2 days and work 1 day. All right, so remember, there's a special 3-day ski rental for $75. Ski rentals cost $25 a day, so if he's going to ski for 2 days, he'd have to pay $50 to ski, right? And also pay for the ski pass, so that's going to equal $73, right? Per day. So that's 46 plus 50, that's $96, right? So it makes sense for him to buy the 3-day ski pass, right? Even though he's not going to ski for 3 days, right? All right, so that's the explicit cost to pay for skiing, right? And then what about that 1 day he works? How much? $30 in utility, exactly. So the explicit cost is going to, again, equal the $75 for the ski pass, and the implicit cost is going to equal $210. I'm sorry, yes. There's also the implicit cost of him skiing, right? He's not working and not making his wages, so he's passing up $210 per day. So that is part of his opportunity cost for the 2 days that he does ski, plus the $30 for the 1 day that he works and loses $30 in utility. So that's going to be $450 in implicit cost. So the relevant cost for option 2 is going to be equal to the 75 plus the 450, which will encompass his opportunity cost, which equals $525. Any questions on how I computed that? Yeah.
What exactly was the cost? It's just like
Right. It's part of the economic way of thinking. When we're talking about costs in economics, we're always talking about opportunity costs, which include explicit and implicit costs, and that's why it's good to go through at least one example like this to kind of just drive home what we mean by it and how we can quantify these things. Yeah. Yes.
so the consumption is there only 2 days, and the explicit cost is 75. But you're only saying 2 days, so it's better for you to have a skew and flow. Oh no.
Got it? You cleared it up? All right, cool. All right, and then finally, what are the relevant costs for option 3? Ski for 3 days and forget work. What is it? So he's got that. So he's skiing for 3 days. Is that a cost? No, exactly. He's getting that utility, right? So what is the implicit cost of skiing for 3 days? The earnings, right? So 210 times 3, right? What's the explicit cost of skiing for 3 days? $75, right? The 3-day pass, exactly. So the $75 implicit cost, 210 times 3 is 630. That means the opportunity cost is equal to 75 plus 630, which is $705. So again, we're ignoring the sunk cost and we are including our explicit plus implicit cost in our calculation of the cost that we consider in economics, which is always opportunity cost. So anytime in this class, when I'm talking about costs, I'm always talking about opportunity costs. And that is always what economists in general are talking about. All right, so final question, what is the relevant cost of his optimal decision? So his optimal decision is going to be the one that has the highest net benefit. The net benefit being the difference between the benefit and the cost. So we have option 1. Stay indoors at the resort and work remotely. We've got a cost of $90, but the benefit is, of course, his earnings, 3 days of wages. So the net benefit is 630 minus 90, which is 540. Option 2, the benefit to option 2, ski for 2 days and work 1 day. Ski for 2 days carries 2 days of utility value. And work 1 day, that's 210 in wages. So that's going to be equal to 270. So the net benefit of option 2 is negative 255. And then the benefit of the third option, ski for 3 days, is 3 days worth of utility, which is equal to $90. So the net benefit is equal to 90 minus 705, which is equal to negative 615. So what is the relevant cost of his optimal decision? $90, right? 90 is the cost of his optimal decision, the optimal decision being the one that has the highest net benefit. Economic way of thinking, folks. This problem highlights it, drives home the concepts. If you didn't figure it out, go back, watch the recording, figure it out. Yeah. No, it's not always the first decision. It's the one with the highest net benefit. It just happens to be the first one in this example. So again, things like these practice problems, they could either wind up exactly as they are on the exam or a version of them that just requires the same logic to figure it out. And it won't be tricky. It wouldn't be tricky. It would just be very clear cut, yeah. Yeah, we just assume that, right? Yeah. The problem will give you that assumption, yeah. That's not something that we can generate. Ultimately, in reality, like when we're trying to get numbers like that, you would do like consumer satisfaction type surveys and, get people's insights into it, yeah. All right, so option 1, $90. All right, so that's our first practice problem, folks. Our adventure has begun. All right, so third common pitfall to decision making is measuring costs and benefits as proportions rather than absolute dollar amounts. So let's say a boy asks his mother, "Are we there yet? Are we almost there?" When they're on, let's say, when they're 10 miles from their destination. So if they are near the end of a 300-mile journey, then her answer will obviously be yes, they're very close. They've been on the road for a long time. But if they've just embarked on a 12-mile journey, obviously she will say no. They've only gone 2 miles. They have 10 more to go. So thinking about distance as a percentage of the total amount to be traveled is, of course, natural and informative. Many also find it natural to think in percentage terms when comparing costs and benefits. The following case demonstrates, though, how this might be a problem. So let's say we have this first case. You're about to buy a clock radio at the nearby campus store for $20, let's say, when a friend tells you that the very same radio is on sale at Walmart for only $10. Walmart is a 15-minute drive away. And if it fails under warranty, you have to send it back to the manufacturer for repairs, no matter where you bought it, so you wouldn't drive back to return it. Second case, you're about to buy a new television set at the nearby campus store for $1,010 when a friend tells you that the very same set is on sale at Walmart for only $1,000. Walmart is again 15 miles away, and again, repairs under warranty would entail sending the set to the manufacturer in each case. So the central concern is whether the cost of driving to Walmart is going to be worth the benefit, is what that should say. Sorry about that. So most people say the trip would definitely be worth making for the clock radio, but definitely not worth making for the television, right? Because for the clock radio, you're saving 50% of the price versus the television set where you're only saving 1% of the price, right? But these percentage of the cost are irrelevant. So ultimately, $10 is simply just $10, right? In each case, the benefit of driving to Walmart is exactly the $10 savings from the lower purchase price. So the benefit in terms of the dollar value is what it is. What is the cost of driving to Walmart? Well, it depends on the person and what their opportunity cost is. Some might be willing to drive for as little as $5. While others might not be willing to do it for less than $50, right? Depends on what their time is worth. So therefore, they compare that against that $10 benefit. If somebody is unemployed and they value their time at, let's say, $5, then they're getting a $10 benefit for their time versus not driving, which would only give them $5, and so they would do it versus someone who spending that time would be giving up $50 in wages to save $10. Obviously, that person would not want to do it. So the willingness to drive should be the same in both cases, though. For each of these individuals, for whether it be the clock radio case or the television case. So again, we have to look at numbers and absolutes rather than as percentages. So when using the cost-benefit test, you should express costs and benefits in absolute dollar terms. All right. Next common pitfall to decision making is the failure to understand the marginal versus the average distinction. So let's talk about these two concepts. So to answer the question, should I increase the level by which I am currently engaging in activity X, we must compare the benefit and cost of an additional unit of the activity. So the additional cost of an activity is called the marginal cost. The increase in total cost that results from carrying out one additional unit of an activity. Mathematically, when we're talking about like a total cost relationship, a total cost function, let's say we're talking about how much is the total cost of producing a certain amount of units. The cost of producing an additional unit, the marginal cost, will be the derivative of that total cost function at that amount. So we'll talk more about that when we actually get to the equations. And before I do any derivative stuff, I will do a quick review of derivatives in general for you, for those of you that are a little rusty on it. So don't worry. Again, like I mentioned, we're going to do math in this course. You shouldn't be intimidated by math. You shouldn't unplug from the course. You should be plugged into the course, especially if you're rusty on the math, because although I will show you the steps, you need to be exposed to it several times, both having me directly guide you in class and then you going back home and practicing the stuff on your own. That's why they're called practice problems. You have to practice them to get them down, to be able to get those skills out, because you all have them, whether you've used them a lot or not, they're in there. Again, how good you are at these things is a function of how much you do them. So if you're not doing them or just trying to do them really quickly for an exam, disaster. Don't let disaster happen to you. All right. Yeah, so mathematically, marginal cost is the first derivative of the total cost function. The marginal benefit, the extra benefit of doing one more unit of an activity, um, is the increase in total benefit that results from carrying out one additional unit of an activity. And mathematically, it is the first derivative of the total benefit function. So let's say you're selling stuff. When you sell stuff, you gain revenue, right? Price times quantity sold. So your revenue function is a function of quantity. So what is the marginal benefit of selling one more unit? Well, it's going to be the marginal revenue. It's going to be the derivative of the revenue function. How much extra revenue can you gain by producing one more unit, by selling one more unit? We'll talk more about that when we actually get to the production section, but it's just a way to start understanding that like these general concepts you learned in microeconomics via just description actually have like mathematical meaning, because ultimately most of what you learned in your introductory courses translates into math. In fact, when you get up to the PhD level, economics is all math. I might have mentioned this already, but I might not have. When I went into my PhD program, they basically told me, we don't care if you know economics. We just want to know that you know math to a very sophisticated extent and statistics. Anyway, so the cost benefit rule tells us to keep increasing the level of an activity as long as its marginal benefit exceeds its marginal cost. So that's basically the principle that underlies optimal decision making. Keep doing an activity as long as the marginal benefit exceeds the marginal cost. But we have to understand the distinction between these marginal benefits and costs and the average cost and average benefit. The average cost of undertaking, let's say, n units of an activity is the total cost of the activity divided by n, right? And the average benefit of undertaking n units of an activity is the total benefit of the activity divided by the amount of units of that activity, n, that you do. So now I'm going to highlight why the distinction between the two is important via this example. So the question is, should Tom launch another boat? So Tom manages a small fishing fleet of 3 boats. His current daily cost of operations, including the boat rentals and the fisherman wages, is $300, or on average $100 per boat, right? 300 divided by 3 is 100. His daily total revenue or benefit from the sale of fish is currently $600, or on average $200 per boat. 600 divided by 3. Tom decides that since his cost per boat is on average less than his revenue per boat, he should launch another boat. And it seems to be reasonable. The question is this a sound decision? So the information given tells us only the average cost and the average benefit of launching a boat, right? So here's the quick calculations. Average cost per boat, 100. Average benefit per boat, 200. So average benefit outweighs average cost. Seems like he should add another boat. Knowing the average benefit and average cost per boat does not enable us to decide whether launching another boat makes economic sense or not, though. Suppose the marginal cost, the extra cost of sending out a boat and its crew is, let's say, constant at $100 per boat. So Tom should launch a 4th boat, only if doing so will add at least $100 in daily revenue. Suppose that the relation between the number of boats launched and the daily total revenue is as described in this table. So you've got 0 boats, obviously 0 daily total benefit, 0 average benefit. Sends 1 boat out, that gets him a total benefit of 300. Average, 300 divided by 1, 300. Sends out 2 boats. Daily total benefit increases to 480. Daily average benefit increases to 240. Marginal benefit, though, the difference between sending that first boat and that second boat is what? It's 180, right? So there's a 180 additional benefit to sending out that second boat, which is greater than 100. So yeah, it makes sense for him to keep going, right? 3rd boat, we see the marginal benefit. The difference in total benefits from the 2nd to the 3rd boat, in this case, is 120, greater than 100. Makes sense to keep sending out that 3rd boat. 4th boat, though, going from the 3rd to the 4th, the total benefit is now 640, whereas it was only 600 prior to that with 3 boats, making the marginal benefit 40, which is less than 100, which is less than the marginal cost. Marginal benefit is less than marginal cost. Should he send out that 4th boat? No. But the average told him he should, right? So understanding the marginal versus the average distinction will help in understanding the optimal way of accounting for costs in economic decision making, which is ultimately the best kind of decision making within a particular context, in this context, this class. All right, so again, if Tom launched a fourth boat, the average daily revenue would fall to 160 per boat, which is still more than the assumed 100 marginal cost. But note that total revenue from 4 boats is only $40 more per day than the total revenue from 3 boats. This means that marginal revenue from launching the 4th boat is only $40, which is less than the marginal cost, as I already said. So here's our original table, and this one tracks the marginal benefit. It has the numbers between the lines just to tell us that, again, we're talking about the extra benefit gain from launching an additional boat. So once again, you can track the marginal benefit on this table to once again see that the 4th boat only has a marginal benefit of 40, which again is less than the 100. So this example makes clear that increasing the level of an activity may not be justified even though its average benefit at the current level is significantly greater than its average costs. Many businesses actually make the wrong decisions in terms of like how much they should produce, etc., because they're not looking at marginal values, they're looking at average values, and that is a mistake. All right, let's talk about marginal benefit and marginal cost graphically. So in any time we're doing anything mathematically, we consider 2 cases. We consider the discrete case and the continuous case. So we just considered the discrete case of marginal analysis in which we're looking at integer values, whole numbers, 0, 1, 2, and so on. But in reality, not everything occurs in whole numbers. Sometimes things are being sold in fractional values, right? Gasoline is sold in fractions of gallons, etc. So whenever we're talking about fractional values, we're looking at the continuous case of whatever we're analyzing. And a continuous case is analyzed best with graphs and with equations. So that's most of what we'll be doing in this class. We'll be looking at continuous cases. We'll start off by just looking at graphs in this chapter. So the examples just described entail decisions about an activity that could take place only on a specific level, no boats, 1 boat, 2 boats, and so on, integer values. The level of many other activities can, however, vary continuously. So one can buy gasoline in various quantities. For activities that are continuously variable, it's often convenient to display the comparison of marginal benefit and marginal cost graphically. So in this case, we're looking at the long distance cost of phone calls. Here are minutes per month on the x-axis, so that's the independent variable, and that is affecting the dependent variable, which in this case is the long distance rate, the cents per minute. So we've got marginal cost being constant in this case at $4, and then we've got the marginal benefit, the extra benefit gain from additional minutes used to be declining. So the question is here, how much should Susan talk to Hal each month? So Susan has a telephone plan for which the charge is 4 minutes, 4 cents per minute for a long distance call to her boyfriend Hal. Fractional minutes are billed at the same rate, so a 30-second call would cost her 2 cents as well. The value to Susan measured in terms of her willingness to pay, her reservation price, of an additional minute of conversation with Hal is shown on curve MB, the marginal benefit, which again is this decreasing curve here. So each additional minute on the phone, she values less and less, right? That first minute talking to Hal, I guess it's her boyfriend, she values a lot, but after 100 minutes, she gets a little bored, right? She's like, all right, I love you, but we got to go. Anyway, so that's what that curve represents, right? So the question is, how many minutes should she spend on the phone with Hal each month? So again, we're looking at, examining the marginal benefit versus the marginal cost of each additional minute of talking, right? So as long as the marginal benefit exceeds marginal cost, it makes sense to keep talking, right? But if the marginal cost exceeds marginal benefit, it doesn't make sense to keep talking, right? So therefore, what is the optimal amount of minutes that she's going to speak to Hal each month? 400, right? That's the point where marginal benefit equals marginal cost. All right, so again, the downward slope of the curve marginal benefit reflects the fact that the value of an additional minute declines with the total amount of conversation that has occurred thus far. Curve marginal cost in the diagram measures the cost of each additional minute. I already covered all this. All right, so those pitfalls of decision making you should understand. You should understand the practice problem, of course, and the marginal benefit, marginal cost thing is going to underlie a lot of what we do. I'm going to talk about it a lot in different contexts. So just keep it in mind now. We're going to go to the math soon. I think chapter 3 or 4 is when we jump into derivatives and start actually talking about those things explicitly. But we'll be doing some algebra before that with respect to like demand and supply, like the basic market model that is the standard like second chapter of these courses. So that's what we'll cover at the beginning of next week. But let's finish up the first part of this chapter. We'll actually finish up chapter 1 on Tuesday. I forgot there's a little bit more of chapter 1 that I don't cover on this second day. So actually I won't be opening up homeworks and mini papers yet. So don't worry about that yet. But everything will happen soon. All right, so let's talk about the invisible hand. So one of the most important insights of economic analysis is that the individual pursuit of self-interest is often not only consistent with broader social objectives, but actually even required by them. Wholly unaware of the effects of their actions, self-interested consumers often act as if they're driven by what Adam Smith, this Irish economist, in the 18th century called the invisible hand to produce the greatest social good. So Adam Smith is considered the father of economics. He wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776, which is the first time anybody sat down and like wrote out all the ideas that underlie our economic interactions that eventually wound up becoming microeconomic theory. So before that, philosophers had talked about some of these issues like Plato, Aristotle, and others after them. But it was always within the context of other discussions like morals and ethics and whatnot. It was never like, let's just talk about how the economy works. And he did it. The book is fat. It's super boring. But I do recommend you look at it at some point because it's super powerful as well. Like it has changed the world. But it will put you to sleep as well. So if you're having trouble sleeping, I would say grab a copy of The Wealth of Nations, and you will fall asleep quickly. Anyway, in perhaps the most widely quoted passage from his book, The Wealth of Nations, he wrote, "It is not the benevolence of the butcher," so benevolence, right, the good intentions, the goodwill of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner. It's not from their good intentions, but from their regard for their own self-interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, and never talk to them of our necessity, but of their advantage. So Smith observed that competition among sellers fostered attempts to develop better products and cheaper ways of producing them. And this sort of drive for them to always try to benefit themselves as much as possible, in some weird way, like coordinates all the productive activities of a society and winds up resulting in like an efficient outcome. And therefore, the result is our market economy, right? The market economy that we're all a part of. Is the market economy perfect? No. Oftentimes, the invisible hand is cited by those economists that I mentioned earlier that try to assert our theory as being doctrine truth. They try to basically use the concept of the invisible hand to justify why markets should be left alone completely. Governments should not be involved in the markets whatsoever. What those economists are not acknowledging is what are called market failures. Markets fail. Sometimes prices are too high because firms have too much power, and that's not natural. That's just something that has resulted from like certain conditions that, for whatever reason, led to that kind of concentration. And under situations like that, governments should be involved. Sometimes markets have external costs. Firms that are producing, they're producing goods for everybody. Yeah, they're looking out for themselves, and we're getting paper clips, houses, etc. But some of these firms are like just throwing all their excess whatever into the rivers and like overusing our lands and like ruining the environment. under those situations, because the market does not give these firms an incentive for them to change their behavior, then the government should step in and mitigate those situations. Also, there's certain goods that private markets cannot allocate properly, like public goods, goods that are just available out there, like rivers and farmland, etc., that just exists independently of ownership. These things, like if we leave them alone and just say, well, the markets will deal with stuff, like they eventually get ruined because everybody is just trying to do the best they can for themselves and not considering what those effects are doing to the rest of society. And so those are the three main cases of market failure, and we can't avoid them. And Adam Smith didn't ignore them either, and he in no way intended his term, the invisible hand, to justify that approach, that like pure free market approach. Yes, markets should operate on their own mostly, but we have to acknowledge that there's market failure and there is a role for government in the operation of markets. The opposite case to a free market economy is a command economy, an economy where like the central authority makes all decisions about production, consumption, distribution, like we saw in like the Soviet Union from 1917 to 1989. In those situations, the intentions are great. We should take care of everybody. Everybody should be taken care of, and everybody should get everything that they need to have a decent life, and that's wonderful. But the problem with that is that good intentions eventually erode. Like you may have people coming in, yes, this is what we want to do, but then over time, because they've been able to concentrate power, and in order to initiate and execute this system that they have in place in their minds, that again is intended to help everybody, that power eventually starts to corrupt those that wind up getting it, and then they wind up just using the power for themselves and then just leaving the scraps to everyone else. And then this central authority that's meant to like help everybody is responsible for not making enough of the things people need and making too much of the things people don't need. So in the Soviet Union, we saw huge lines for like bread and milk, like the simple things, things that people needed, like they just didn't have enough of. And so that other extreme case doesn't work either. History has shown us that. And so there has to be sort of like a hybrid situation, a mixed economy where like there is a free market economy, but there is government also playing a role within that. And that needs to be acknowledged. Sometimes that is not acknowledged. And again, like the economists that don't acknowledge it will often cite the invisible hand, saying that Adam Smith purported that we need to not have any role for government in the economy in order for it to function the best way possible, and that's just flat out wrong. Modern economists sometimes lose sight of the fact that Smith did not believe that only selfish motives are important. In his earlier treatise, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, he wrote movingly about the compassion we feel for others. Smith was also aware that the outcome of unbridled pursuit of self-interest is sometimes far from socially benign. Sometimes it can be harmful. In the case of an external cost of an activity like pollution, a cost that falls on people who are not directly involved in the activity. External costs and benefits often motivate laws that limit individual discretion. Such laws may be viewed as a way of making the costs and benefits seen by individuals more nearly resemble those experienced by the community as a whole. So a lot of what that policy is intended to do is to like quantify to those that are causing the costs, those costs, right, and make it theirs. And so economic analysis sort of helps to try to pin down what those costs might actually look like, and try to help policymakers to make the right decisions with respect to how much they're limiting certain activities. All right, would parents want their children to marry Homo economicus? So many economists and other behavioral scientists remain skeptical about the importance of duty and other unselfish motives, right? They focus too much on this idea of like the self-interested individual motive that collectively does wind up leading the economy to be in like a decent equilibrium. The stereotypical decision maker in the self-interested model that we often model in economics is given the label Homo economicus, or economic man. So like the decision maker that we're talking about in our models with respect to consumption, with respect to production, is a self-interested individual that is always making the most rational decision. They're always choosing the option that's going to make them best off. They're never thinking, oh, is my decision going to hurt other people? How will other people feel about this? But again, we're talking about a simplified version of reality. We're talking about a person that doesn't necessarily have to exist, but makes sense within the model in order to then get us to like the larger predictions that the model can give us about prices, about a certain industry, about markets, about the economy as a whole. Homo economicus, this hypothetical person within the models, does not experience the sort of sentiments that motivate people to vote or to return lost wallets to their owners with the cash intact. Personal material costs and benefits are the only thing that he cares about. He does not contribute voluntarily to private charities or public television stations, keeps promises only when it pays to do so, and if the pollution laws are not carefully enforced, disconnects the catalytic converter on his car to save on fuel, and so on and so forth. Obviously, many people do not fit the me-first caricature of the self-interest model. It's critical to remember that the self-interest model is not intended as a prescription for how to conduct your own affairs. The self-interest model is intended only to capture one part of human behavior, albeit an important one. Unfortunately, you are going to come across economists that actually believe people should behave the way this hypothetical person behaves in our models. And so ultimately, a lot of the times, the people that you find actually behaving like this are going to be economists. So you need to be wary of that. Anyway, we're done with today's lecture. Congratulations on getting through the first lecture. I hope you guys have a good weekend. I will see you on Tuesday. And for those of you trying to get into the class, please come up here and sign the sign-in sheet. Thank you.